Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to Round 5 coverage of the 2014 U.S. Chess Championship taking place in St. Louis, Missouri. For Round 5, I chose the game Alejandro Ramirez versus Mackenzie Molner, or Mac Molner, I guess is the way he goes. It's an interesting game. Let's see, I gave a little introduction to Alejandro previously. Let me say a few words about Mac. He's also a young man of 25 years old, like Alejandro, and from Englewood, New Jersey. He became a grandmaster relatively recently, actually just last year, and he was a wild card pick for this tournament. He has a FIDE rating of 25-22, which makes him the 30th ranked active player in the United States. So he's a bit of an underdog in terms of actually winning the tournament, but I'm sure he's happy just to be playing in it and with a chance to play all these other great players. So a recent grandmaster, not a top one, but still competitive. So Alejandro has the white pieces, and he plays knight f3. And we get into an English opening after c5. White plays c4, knight f6, knight to c3. And this is a symmetrical English. And black decides to break the symmetry first with d5. There are other moves here for black. Maybe the most common one is knight c6. Well, e6 also is a very common move. e6 and knight c6. But d5 has been popular recently, just immediately busting up the center. But it does give up a center pawn for a flank pawn. So it gives a little bit of advantage to white, but not excessive. White goes for the fianchetto setup, and black just continues developing. So all these are very normal moves. And even this one, knight c7, I thought it was a bit funny, but it turns out it's the most popular move in the database. I don't know if it happens in this game, but one idea with this move is that perhaps the knight will get rerouted to e6 and then to d4, where it'll be a strong point supported by the other knight. And maybe it has ideas over on the queen side. Hard to say. But that doesn't happen for a while. There's other things to take care of first. White plays d3, and black gets on the move e5. And white castles. Black plays bishop e7. And white goes knight d2. So another mysterious knight move. But this one, I think, is a little easier to understand. The knight has a couple of good perches on c4 or on e4, and it can choose to go to either one, depending on the circumstances. And also it opens up this diagonal for the light squared bishop. So right here, black plays an unusual move. It's in the opening book still, but not the most common move. The most common move is just bishop to d7, supporting the knight. And what black plays instead is actually castles. And that allows the bishop to take the knight. And you might wonder if that's a good move or not. And of course, that's the question. Is that a good move? Obviously, this is a good piece for white. It controls this good diagonal, and a lot of white's play. If you look at the squares of these knights, even they're all hitting on these light squares. So a lot of white's play to this point in the game has involved the light squared strategy. But there's an advantage to taking the knight, which is that it leaves black with these doubled pawns that are isolated, and so they will definitely become weak later in the game. And so in fact, that's what Alejandro chose to do. He chose to take the challenge, take the knight, give up his good bishop, and play on for activity against these weak pawns. And black, in compensation for the weak pawns, has open lines and the bishop pair. So a balanced game at this point. White continues with knight c4, so there's the knight jumping into that good perch on c4. And now that there's no pawn on the d file or the b file, there's nothing really that can chase it away. So that's an excellent post for the knight. And now the move in the opening book at this point is f6, because the knight here has attacked the pawn on e5, and black, you might think, needs to defend it. But what Mac Molner comes up with here is the move bishop to h3. And so this is either a recent development in theory or else a novelty. But in any case, it's not in my opening book. And it's interesting. So white has a choice, but if he just moves his rook away, then black will defend the e-pawn, and he's got a nice bishop here with control of some of these light squares around around white's king, and maybe the queen can somehow come over and coordinate with the bishop and form up an attack. Although right now, with this knight controlling these critical squares, it's going to be difficult for the queen to really join in quickly. But maybe that's a long-term plan. Anyway, what Alejandro chose to do at this point was he chose to sacrifice the exchange, giving up the rook for the bishop. And so I think this makes an interesting game, because I'm never sure in my own games, and I'm sure this is true of many chess players, when is it worthwhile? You see masters doing this fairly often. When is it worthwhile giving up the exchange? And white decides that's the right thing to do. And to start with, he gets this center pawn. So that's an important compensation. So and black does not take the rook right away, but throws in the move bishop to f6, getting this bishop on a good diagonal. But this also gives up a second pawn. So now white grabs the gauntlet and plays knight to c6. And I was thinking, it would be nice if you could just take there, and then the queen could come here with the threat of checkmate, and also a threat on the knight winning a piece. But unfortunately, black doesn't get two moves in a row. I was watching this live, and I guess I wasn't sure whose move it was here, but or I was misthinking things. But actually, I was looking at it in this position. I was wondering if that was a possible line. But after knight c6, the queen is under attack and has to move first. So queen to d7 was played, and the queen can't go to this square because the knight still controls it. So, but queen to d7 kicks the knight and drives it to the side of the board. So this is the position that Alejandro had to consider, and I heard him talking after the game a little bit about this, and he thought, even so, he's got two pawns, and in compensation for the exchange, which is usually more than enough, and his only real issue is this knight on the side of the board, and he thought he would be able to get it back into the game quickly enough. The chess engine rates this position as about even, so pretty interesting. I guess there is sufficient compensation anyway for the exchange. So black grabs the rook, and then develops with the rook a to b8, putting some pressure on the b pawn, and now knight to d1. It's an interesting move. He wants to defend the b pawn so that the bishop is free to move, and he also wants to be able to bring this knight back into the game. I was going to say, yeah, there's actually two pieces hitting this rook, so the bishop is not yet free to move. But after this knight comes to c4, then I'll have three pieces defending the b pawn. Okay, rook f d8 was played by black, just trying to activate his pieces, and now knight to c4. And so now we have that situation where this pawn on b2 is well protected, and so these pieces are free to move. Black continues with knight d5, and white plays bishop to e3. A little bit of a surprising move to me, because this bishop seemed like a good piece, and he's allowing... Of course, it wasn't doing a whole lot. I guess I should elaborate a little bit more. It was just defending this b pawn when it was sitting here on c1, so it wasn't doing very much. But it has this diagonal to go back and forth on, and it might find some squares later in the game. But at this point, if you look at it, every square on this diagonal is under control of black, except for this one here, where it's not doing a whole lot. So again, there's an interesting choice by the Grandmaster Alejandro. Decides to just give up that bishop and allow the doubling of the pawns and opening up a line for his queen. And he's playing on with the rook and two knights versus two rooks and a bishop. And once again, the engine thinks this position is about even, so he's got adequate compensation at least. Black continues with rook e6, just developing his pieces. Rook to c1, getting that piece out, and also freeing up the b pawn, so now he can play b3 and get out of the glare of the dark squared bishop there. Rook to a6. So going after the a pawn, which will prevent, of course, b3 after a3. B3 is no longer a possible move because of the rook on the b file. So forcing some weaknesses in white's pawn structure. This b pawn might be permanently backwards because black has a good c pawn there to prevent it from coming all the way forward to b4. And then black strikes out with h5 on the other side of the board. So white brings his queen in the game with queen f4, and now rook e8, putting some pressure on this weak pawn here on the e file. Knight to f2. So this knight that went to d1 to defend the b pawn is no longer needed. The pawn on c4 defends. The rook has gone away from the b file, so this knight can get into the game. h4, trying to soften up the squares around white's king. And now knight to e4, putting pressure on the bishop on f6. I would say if there's a sore spot in black's camp, maybe it is this bishop. It doesn't seem to have a lot of scope, and all of these squares seem to be under the control of the white pieces. So interesting to see how one bad piece can kind of make the whole position bad. Let's see. Rook to c6 was played here. Okay. And now g4. So white didn't want to allow an exchange here and creating some weaknesses around the king, so he wants to keep the lines closed, pushes on with g4. And now bishop to d8, trying to find a good square for the bishop. But already at this point, the engine has decided that white is looking better than black. And after bishop to d8, it thinks that white has a winning advantage. So the line recommended by the chess engine is something like this. Queen e7. Maybe, oh, I know. Queen e7 is lining up to grab this rook after hopefully chasing the knight away. Rook to f1, lining up against the f-pawn. Rook to e6, tripling on the e-file and preparing to sacrifice the exchange back by taking the knight here. Rook to f3, defending the e-pawn behind the rook. And now rook takes e4, d takes e4, and queen takes e4. And I guess it would continue with the further queen exchange. And so in this position, black gave back the exchange for one pawn, so he remains one pawn down. He's got 2 over here against 2, and he's got 3 over here against 4. But the pawns that white has that are extra are these doubled e-pawns, and are not looking so great. So while there's an advantage for white in this line, it's not overwhelming. And looks like maybe black could hope for a draw in this position. Instead, black played the move bishop to d8, which is logical, just getting out of the glare of that knight and maybe planning to reroute the bishop somewhere else. Although, once again, notice that the knights are really controlling all of these squares that bishop might go to, so it's really having a hard time finding a useful role in this game. Pretty interesting play, I think. So after the bishop retreated, white played knight e5, hitting the queen, and now black decides he has to give the exchange back. So rook takes, and queen takes g4 check. So he gets a pawn for the exchange. It's similar to the previous line, but black has more aggressive pieces, and he keeps the queen on. So he's down a pawn, but you know, he's got an active position, and I think he can hope for counter chances. But the engine, with its cold objective eye, thinks that white is just better here. And it starts with the move king f2, just getting out of that check. Rook e6, so bringing the rook over to chase the queen away, and also setting a little trap. Kind of the most natural move in this position, with the queen under attack, is to just grab the c-pawn over here. Cancel that. Yeah, queen takes c5. And this was not played. Alejandro saw through this. It turns out there's a good move for black in this position. Bishop to b6, setting up the skewer of the queen and looking at the pawn on e3. So after the queen moves, say it goes back to d5, and then queen f4 check. Not a move you might think of when you're trying to calculate the sequence, but of course because of the pin on the e-pawn, the queen can't be taken. The king is driven away, And now bishop takes e3. And what's the standings? It's still one pawn up for white, but black's pieces are in much better shape. They're more active, and white's king is in a bit of danger here. So this would be a way to play. It's almost, maybe still a slight edge for white, but almost even. And also notice the rook is under attack here too. So that was not played in this position after rook e6. That's black was kind of setting a trap for white. White saw through that. Alejandro played queen f4. And of course, he would be happy with the queen trade because that would just leave him with a few extra pawns and going into an endgame that he has. Well, he has one extra pawn at this point, right? 3 against 4 and 2 on 2. Yeah, white has one extra pawn at this point, but he would be happy to go into an endgame here and just play on with the extra pawn and have every chance of winning. Black steps away from the exchange by playing queen h3, and now rook takes c5. So he had to give up a pawn in order to keep the queens on, but I think black is playing for chances. And if he could only chase that knight away, you know, he could play the rook to f6 and skewer the queen and the rook. But the knight is hard to chase away. It's doing an excellent job of controlling these critical squares around the king, so it's just difficult for difficult for black to get his attack going. But he does have the bishop still, and he decides to use it with bishop to e7. Now white comes in with queen b8 check, chasing the king here, and the king runs back. And then, sorry, not the queen again, but the rook. Rook to h5. And now I think the interpose of the rook is forced. The king can't run backwards, and it comes out to g5 here. This looks like big trouble. g6 rather. Rook to g6, queen h8, threatening checkmate on h7, and rook takes e4. It's the only way to avoid the mate. And then, the computer gives this nice finesse, queen h7 check, driving the king to f6, and then queen takes. So not even messing up the pawns to get the piece. And now white's an exchange up, as well as a few pawns up. So after rook h5 check, black has to interpose with the rook, and then white can exchange off. He took, let's cancel that, he took with the king. It's about equal either way. And then queen f4 check. So retrieving the queen from the far reaches of the board and getting in close. King goes to g6. Might have been slightly more accurate to go to h7, but it's tough to say. About equal, and white is still, I mean, between those two moves it's about the same. White is still just better here. So with careful play, white should go on and win this, but black has still got a queen on and is playing for chances. You know, he's got a threat on the h-pawn if this queen should ever lose its grip. And if he can somehow get in here with the queen and start delivering checks, he maybe has hopes for a draw. But the king seems fairly secure. The king goes to e8. White pushes on with f5, at least chasing that nasty knight away. The knight drops back to d2. Bishop comes to g5, chasing the queen away. Queen goes to d6, and he tries to bring his king forward, maybe to help out the queen with some attack over here. Knight to f3, hitting the bishop, and bishop takes e3, grabbing the pawn. So white has given up a pawn. Let's count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against 1, 2, 3, 4. So white is just one pawn up in this situation, and with the queen and knight versus queen and bishop. And the king maybe is getting a little uncomfortable, but once again the knight seems to be doing a tremendous job of covering some of these key squares. So the queen can't jump in here and deliver the checkmate so easily. It's white's turn. White plays queen to e7. Okay, hitting the bishop and maybe threatening to come over here. Also hitting the pawn on g7, so the bishop comes back to defend. And the queen grabs pawn over here. And now the winning plan for white becomes clear. He just has to, with his knight holding on to key squares over here on the king side, and his queen over here, he can just advance these pawns forward. He doesn't have enough material with all the pieces around the black king to deliver a checkmate, but he can just bring these pawns forward, get another queen, and win the game that way. So black really is getting a bit desperate and looking for ways to create some counterplay. Tries queen g4, and the pawns start marching. Queen f4, looking maybe to check over here, and also getting the queen and the bishop in a battery. Queen to f7 check, so bringing the queen back for defense before things get cancel that. Queen to f7 check. I moved it to f2, f7. So, but as I was saying, bringing the queen back and chasing the king forward. King comes to g4, and now queen to c4. So pinning the queen to the king, so that stops any idea of the queen coming down here and delivering a check to the white king. And king to h3. And I was really expecting to just see an exchange of queens here, because it seems like with the queenside pawns this is an easily winning endgame. And well, the chess engine rates queen takes f4 as +3, meaning it's probably a winning advantage, but not the strongest move in the position. It actually thinks a4, which was played, is the strongest move. And so now black is still trying for tricks, plays queen to g4, maybe hoping to sneak in step by step closer to the king. The queen comes to c5, looking on these dark squares and also still in a position to help these pawns on the queen side go forward. The bishop comes to f4, and this actually is a mistake, and white seizes upon the mistake immediately, because the king is almost getting trapped over here, and the queen is really short of squares as well. White brings his queen back to f2, and now black plays the move bishop to g3, with the idea that if white takes the bishop, then the queen can start grabbing pawns over here on the queen side, but overlooking one key move here. So if you're white and it's your turn to move, what do you play in this position? Okay, it's an easy one, so you should probably pause the video if you haven't got it and stare at the board until you can find the winning move for white. I am going to give the answer away now. It is knight g1 check. And that's just game over. There's no move for the king. The queen is protecting the pawn and covering this square. All the other squares are blocked by the king's own pieces, so kind of a self-mate there. So actually, after the move bishop to g3, Mac realized what he had done and just resigned. Well, Alejandro said he didn't play the move knight g1. He just started to hover his hand over the knight there, and then Max saw what was happening and resigned at that point. So the move knight g1 was not actually played in the game. But that's how the game ended. Let me add that Alexander Linderman, the leader of the tournament, drew his game today and remains in first place. Timur Gureyev, who was in second place, half a point behind, lost his game to Varuzhin Akobian today, and so he fell back. He's now at 3 out of 5. Alexander's at 4 out of 5. And also at 3 out of 5, tied for Timur in second place are Varuzhin Akobian, Gadakamsky, and Alexander Onashek. So that's the standings at the end of round 5. A full point lead for Alexander Linderman, the surprise leader of the tournament so far. And pretty interesting tournament shaping up. There are 6 more rounds to go. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this coverage. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.